This week's video is sponsored by mpb.com.
Hello everybody, and welcome to what is quite a rainy Snowdonia today, which is perfect because, as you might be able to tell, autumn is now in full swing. Today also marks, or this week roughly, about 7 weeks since I've had this camera, this Ricoh GR IIIx, I think it's called. I've just checked my calendar and it's actually 11 weeks that I've had the camera for, which is longer than 7 or 4. I think I'll keep it as a month though in the title. It's a bit more compelling, even if it's completely inaccurate. Now the first thing I'll say about this camera is that I bought it as like an everyday camera, something that I could use to capture the mundane in between efforts to go and get more kind of spectacular scenes and mood. So if the conditions look good and I'm on my way up a mountain, I'll be doing so with this lot. But every other time I leave the house, whether it's to go and get milk from the shop or whether it's to go to the dentist for the first time in 10 years, I will be taking this. And the main issue I found since I purchased it, and I knew this before I purchased it, is that there's no weatherproofing. And I can't blame the camera for that. They're fairly upfront with it. But for me, here in Wales, in the conditions that I want to use it in, that is a bit of an issue. And as I say, that's entirely my problem because I still bought the camera knowing that that was the case. But yeah, that's one thing I've come up against. Another thing, which is different but I suppose fairly similar, is that I mentioned in the first video that I did about this camera, where I spoke about just purchasing it, which I imagine was about 7 weeks ago, that one of the main reasons I was interested in it was that I thought it was very pocketable. Now, size-wise, it is absolutely pocketable. That's one of the reasons I love this camera, is its tiny form factor. However, when I mentioned in that video that I was going to be using this as a pocket camera, lots of people warned me about dust and how lint that sort of lives in your pocket can get in and around the sensor, basically, if you're not careful, and that can be a big problem. Now that absolutely terrified me, so I bought one of these, a lens cap of sorts. And the problem I found with that, again entirely my own doing, is that when I take this off the camera to use the camera, I then put this in my pocket, this then gets covered in lint, I don't notice, I put this on the camera, and well, I make the problem much, much worse than if I just had the camera in my pocket without the lens cap. So that's a couple of things I've found so far. Now, sorry for the interruption again, but as a visual representation of how important weather sealing is to me, a few days after I filmed this video, I went back to Bethgelert to take some more photos because I enjoyed it so much the first time, and the weather forecast was a bit more dramatic. Lots more wind, lots of rain, and as a consequence, I took my Sony A7R because that's weather sealed. And I think I got some slightly more dramatic imagery. So here's a photo that I've just shown you that I took with the Ricoh, and here's a photo I got a few days later with the Sony. And there's leaves coming down, there's wet surfaces everywhere. A much better photo, I think. And it's not because the Sony's got a different sensor, it's not because of resolution or dynamic range, it's purely because I trust the camera in those conditions. And this could have done a perfectly fine job at capturing those conditions, except for the fact that water might get into the electronics. And that's a shame, because in every other way, I think this camera would be perfectly suited to a scene like that. Right, I'm not going to talk about weather sealing anymore, because it'll get boring. I might mention it once more. Actually, I did take this to a much drier place than Wales with great success. I took it on a family holiday to Spain, and in between moments, kind of splashing around in the pool with my son, I took photos of bins, mostly, actually. I don't know why I was particularly drawn to bins that week, but I don't tend to question these things. And yeah, this camera was brilliant to just sort of mooch around
and take photos of anything that I saw that interested me, which, yes, that week was bins.
Yeah, that church in snow, that looked fantastic. I shall bank that. Anyway, cons of this camera. The tripod thread plate thing, tripod plate thread, that's the one, is right next to the battery door and the SD card slot, which is pretty common on small cameras. Don't know why it's common, because it's a nightmare if you want to use a tripod plate and get access to the battery door and the SD card slot, which you need to do quite often with these small cameras because they've got small batteries. Now, luckily with this camera, it does have USB charging, so that eases that a bit, but annoying if you want to use a tripod. Luckily I don't, because I don't like using tripods for photography, and I wouldn't be using one for video because this camera's video features are useless. You don't buy this camera for video in 2022. It's not what it's for. Other cons, I read or saw somewhere before buying this camera that it's quite difficult to take straight photos. It does have a level gauge, as you might have seen on some of the GoPro footage, but I didn't really understand what they meant by that. I mean, how can it be difficult to take straight photos if you've got a camera that has a level gauge? But turns out it is the case. For some reason, I struggle to get the camera level even when I'm looking at the level gauge. Maybe it's because I'm using the screen entirely and not a viewfinder, because it doesn't have a viewfinder. But I don't know why it is. I've not found that with other small cameras like this. So yeah, interesting. If I remember what review that was, I shall link it in the description. It escapes me at the moment. But that, to be honest, concludes my gripes with this camera at the moment. If you were wondering how smart or otherwise it was to sit on that bench, you're right. Absolutely soaked. Anyway, pros of this camera, good points. Ergonomics. I don't really understand how they've done it because it's tiny, as you can see, but this camera is super comfortable to use. Now, as soon as I bought it, I also bought this thumb grip because I assumed it would need it. Truth is, I'm not sure the camera does need this thumb grip. I mean, it certainly helps, but I'm not sure it's needed. In other words, I'm not sure I'd buy it again knowing what I know now, but since I've got it, it does improve the ergonomics, I don't know, 10%, so I might as well use it. Although it does make it a little bit more sort of prodding when it's in my pocket, then that's not ideal. Image quality, fantastic. The stabilization in this camera is brilliant. The APS-C sensor, brilliant. Pretty much all I need for this sort of stuff. And yeah, image quality, I have zero complaints. It's amazing. Menus, I'm getting used to them. They're not the best, not the worst. And I think whenever you have usable menus in a camera this small, it's a thumbs up. Sorry, I've just seen a couple standing under a tree there. It looks quite nice. See if I can involve these trees overhead. Oh, that's quite nice. I have to say though, I think my favourite thing about this camera so far is the screen. And on a camera like this, the screen is crucial because it's the only way you can interact with the photos you're taking and the photos that you've taken. As I say, there's no viewfinder, so the screen is important. And the screen, I think, with cameras like this sometimes, is what lets them down. Not the case with this. It's fantastically sharp, super bright, punchy colours. I love it. God, these people are perfect. I do think maybe 50 or 60mm would have been better. And you can actually get teleconverters for this, unless I dreamt that, but not for me, I don't think. Pocket camera.
And a brilliant one at that. Maybe perfect if you live in the right conditions because of the weather. Yeah. But if you love 40mm or 28, if you don't get the X version, these cameras, I think, are just superb. The image quality, the stabilization, the ergonomics are unlike anything I've ever seen in a body this small. And I think Ricoh needs to be applauded for making this camera because it's, yeah, I love it. And it will accompany me on many trips in the future. I'll just have to check the weather forecast first and clean my pockets. Right, anyway, thank you for watching. Hopefully this has been interesting. And thank you also to mpb.com for sponsoring this video. Now, if you don't know what mpb.com is, basically it's the place to buy and sell used camera gear. So whether it's one of these that you're interested in or literally any other camera or lens, mpb.com is the first place that I would check. And I think over 50% of my gear comes from mpb.com. And every piece of kit that you buy from them comes with a 6-month warranty, and you can buy it safe in the knowledge that it's been checked by experts who recirculate hundreds of thousands of pieces of gear every single year. It's also a fantastic place to sell your camera gear if you've got stuff to sell. It's a super simple process. You just fill in what it is that you're looking to sell. They will give you an immediate quote, and if you're happy with that quote, they'll arrange for a courier to come to your house and pick the gear up. Super simple, seamless, and just a brilliant service. So a huge thank you to them for their continued support of this channel and for their service, and thank you to you for watching. Next week, I don't know what we'll be doing next week, but taking photos of something or other, I imagine. Something or other. Something or other. I'll see you then.